I'd like to welcome everyone to Ignite the Spark. My name is Shar Speck-Pakniak. I am the founder, CEO of Horizons for Girls. We mentor teenage girls, middle school and high school throughout Sheboygan County. And I guess I've learned a lot about the community, about resources, about techniques for working with the students. As they say, lifelong learning, you're always learning more information. And I'm excited about today's topic. My guest today is Carol Sherman Hayde. And Carol, we have not known each other that long, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself, where you come from, what you do. Let's start there.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Shar. My name is Carol Sherman Hayde, and I am a licensed psychotherapist, and I have been doing that for over 30 years. I first started as a teacher, classroom teacher, and it was in that setting that I first realized that our children need a little bit more than what we get in the classroom, and that's when I furthered my studies and I became a therapist. So my practice is in downtown Sheboygan, and I specialize in 3 areas specifically. One is as an educational therapist, which means I've been fortunate to combine my ed background and my psych background, and I work very specifically with children with ADHD, learning disabilities, any social, emotional, behavioral issues that manifest in school. And then right alongside that, my specialty, and second specialty, is working with children and family. I strongly believe in family systems. You can't work with a child individually. You have to work with the system that that child lives in, plays in, is so influenced by. And then my third specialty is working with women in life transitions, kind of the other end of your spectrum, isn't it? And women that, all of the transitions that we go through in life, parenting, empty nesting, career changes, divorce, remarriage, all of those things that every once in a while we need a little extra support on. So those are my 3 areas. I've been in the Sheboygan area for 12 years now, from Chicago originally. And I love the community.
Interesting, very interesting. What I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about today, we met, you were doing a series of programs for Mental Health America, and the topic was ADHD. So I'd like to spend some time talking about that, and why don't we start with, what is that?
Okay, good question. And there are a lot of myths floating around about what ADHD is. The letters stand for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, which sounds like a big thing, sometimes a little scary, sometimes carries a very negative connotation, but it doesn't have to be. And a lot of researchers and the fathers or mothers that speak mostly about this topic try to put a positive spin on it. When a child or an adult, because I believe we don't grow out of this, it changes as we get older, as we become adults and mature and evolve and find our niche in life, hopefully. So it changes, but it never completely goes away, because attention deficit disorder is a neurobiological disorder, meaning it has to do with how our brain is wired. there are tens of thousands of neurons in our brain. And those neurons send messages to each other. And those chemical messages are called neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters are shooting messages in our brain to all parts of our body about what we're supposed to do next. Think of some huge computer system that is sending messages like a train system. All the trains are going in a different direction at different times at different speeds. And that central processing system, our brain, is doing all those things at the same time. So what's been discovered is that when we are deficient in one of three primary neurotransmitters, and they've broken this down to norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. Now, nobody has to remember those, but those are the primary neurotransmitters that they've discovered have the greatest impact on the attention that our brain that we need to focus on, whether it's homework, whether it's a job, whether it's all of the errands we have to do during the day, cleaning the house, no matter what activity we do, the neurotransmitters, those chemical messages, are sending those messages all the time. We're totally unaware of these things. So let's focus back on the child. They're sitting in school and they're given directions. And they understand the directions. But the directions may have been, when you're done with your paper, pick up your paper, walk to the back of the room, put it in the box, and get in line for recess. So there were 5 directions. What the child has to do now is remember every step there. So it's not about comprehension. It's the brain having to listen to all of those, categorize all those, put them in a sequence, and retrieve that very last one about standing in line for recess. So what often happens with that child who has attention difficulties is that they heard you, but they missed the last 3 things that you said because they were so focusing maybe on the first or the second. So there's that child standing in the middle of the room, maybe paper in hand, and they don't know what to do next. So it all depends on how we, the adults in that child's world, help them move forward. We can be angry, we can punish, we can humiliate, or we can walk over to that child and say, Tommy, do you remember what we have to do next? And they'll probably shake their head no. And okay, I'll help you. Now that you have your paper in your hand, walk over to the box, and then you can get in line for recess. So what I work on teaching teachers and parents to do is turn upside down that knee-jerk response that we may have, which is anger, frustration, because we're in a hurry and we're trying to get things done, and rather look at that child with compassion and these new skills and approach that child with, again, compassion, direction, and everybody gets through that moment a whole lot easier. That was a long definition I gave you.
But it seems so simple, and I think in our world we're just hurry, 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 and we expect the same from a student, a child. That's really not fair.
Right, and fair is a key word that often I hear when I work with families as an advocate in the schools. So as an educational therapist, let me talk about that a little bit. Often the family will bring in the child as the patient. And once I take a long history and talk to the parents and work with the child, and this is over a few sessions because I want to know as best I can the world that that child is in. Then I can go as their advocate to the school, observe the child in school, and talk to the teachers, the principal, the counselor, the social worker, who was ever on hand. And we start talking about building skills and talk about alternative approaches to helping that child in the classroom. That unfair comment pops up when the teacher will say, well, I can't make that accommodation for Tommy because then I'll have to do it for everyone else. And I have two responses for that. Number one, everybody doesn't need that accommodation the way Tommy does. So it doesn't make any difference. But if you do it for everybody else, everybody will benefit. Nobody will be inconvenienced by a simple accommodation, by whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So there's this sense that if I help a child, it's going to interfere in my classroom. Or if in the home setting, if I do something for Tommy and not his sister Susie, again, we're going to disrupt. So my teachings are about, it's not going to disrupt anything. If anything, these tools and strategies are going to calm everyone, are going to give you something to use instead of your anger and your frustration. It's going to fill in your pool of knowledge so that mom and dad don't get frustrated, so teacher doesn't get frustrated.
As a parent, what should they maybe say, I wonder if this is an issue, if this is something that my child is having or experiencing. What do you think, or what, obviously you've seen it, but what should they be seeing that says, this is something that needs to be looked at further?
Okay. And those observations of behavior, I think I hear you asking. Mm-hmm. We're going to see some behaviors in school, and we're going to see some behaviors at home. So I'll speak about this, and then we'll kind of work toward how do we get this diagnosis. Some children, well, we're born with this. Again, this is how our brains are wired. Just like we're born, we're going to have brown hair, we're going to be 5'2", we're born with this thing. And so mom and dad may be seeing behaviors or emotional states of mind, how a child responds to situations. Behaviors can be overly excited. Hyperactive is part of the term attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Sometimes a child is too quiet, is too reserved, is not very social. So I think to start with, we can look at either extreme on the continuum. Too quiet, too active. And then sometimes when the child gets to school, the teacher's also observing these things. The too quiet child or the hyperactive child that can't sit in their desk, can't stand in line, can't sit at the lunchroom table, is running all over the playground, which is actually the best thing for that child in the middle of the day. And we want to take that information, so, which means parents talking to teachers, teachers talking to parents, parents talking to the pediatrician, especially when we're talking about a very young child. Some children can be seen to have some of these behaviors in infancy. That's rare. But you can have the child that is so difficult to put to sleep at night. You can have the child that no matter how many toys you put in front of them, that child will not sit in one spot and play for 2 minutes. They're all over the place. So sometimes these behaviors are quite overt very early on. On average, these behaviors are picked up in elementary school, between 1st and 3rd or 4th grade, when the demands on the child become greater. You have to sit in your desk. You have to stand in line. You have to work on something for a certain amount of time. Those restrictions can be very difficult for a child who has attentional difficulties.
Interesting. And as you're talking, I'm 63 years old, and I still remember in kindergarten there's this one little kid, and he would get so hyper, and I remember the teacher, Mrs. Osius, saying, sit down, and we had just gotten a snack and chocolate milk, and he said, no, I'm not going to sit down, and he threw that chocolate milk across the classroom. I still remember seeing chocolate milk just spraying across the classroom. But obviously that probably was something that he was struggling with then.
Definitely. And I'm glad you described a situation like that, because there's so many ways we can look at that. If that was a totally isolated incident, did that child sleep the night before? Did something emotionally catastrophic happen to that child that morning? Did grandma just die? Did the dog just die? An isolated incident like that would not raise the question about attention issues. If there were behaviors like that were happening every day, then you start to see a pattern. And at that point, the teacher would certainly want to talk to mom and dad and say, this is what I'm seeing in the classroom. What are you seeing at home? Because one of the keys to this diagnosis are these behaviors need to be seen in all aspects of the child's life. On the weekends, at home, at school, at grandma's, at the birthday party. So it's this child no matter where the child is. But with isolated incidents, if that were the case, we want to be looking at what's happening emotionally for this child in this child's world, what's happening psychologically, are there illnesses? So a child that's acting out, the first place we go is not ADHD.
Okay, interesting. The other thing, I totally enjoyed the sessions that you had presented, very interesting. And then you recommended a book for us to read, and you talked about, you didn't as much as the book does, and I'm still reading it, but talking about the differences between boys and girls.
Yes.
And I found that very interesting.
Yes. Like there's just about anything, there are differences between boys and girls. But what we see, and again, this is decades of research, generally speaking, boys are diagnosed with ADHD more than girls, partly because boys will tend to have the hyperactive component, and so they will be picked out of the classroom so much easier They're again the one that can't stand in line, that can't sit in their seat, that getting up to asked to go to the bathroom. They're constantly moving. Their brains are like little motors going all the time. Now, there is such a thing as a hyperactive girl, but she may be channeling it in a different way because everything about a little girl's brain is different than a little boy's brain. So she may be the Miss Social Butterfly. She may be the one that's directing everybody, all the other little girls on the playground. So the observations just might be that she's a little bit more socially appropriate, but she may also be struggling with having to pay attention on her work. The other extreme, and let me interrupt myself here. There are 3 categories of ADHD. One is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So that is the attentional issues and impulsivity and concentration, as well as the hyperactive behaviors. A second form is ADD, attention deficit disorder, where we do not have the hyperactivity component, but we still have the struggle with staying on task, with completing our work, with the child feeling bad about themselves. And that's the most difficult child to identify, because they're the one that is sitting quietly, maybe in the back of the room. Maybe they're not getting their homework done, but they're not disruptive. But they're also struggling to stay on task. They're the one that you see daydreaming or doodling or looking out the window, or they're the straggler at the end of the line because they're in line, but they don't really remember where they're going. So, and the third is a combination of those, is the ADHD with the inattentive. So this isn't just one title, it's a very complex diagnosis, and it does look different in girls. More profoundly as these boys and girls get older. As the boys and girls get older, again, we're hopefully teaching them tools, teaching them strategies, impacting the family environment so that they are not constantly punished for not doing what's expected of them. As we get into high school, these boys or girls, may be channeling that energy into activities, into sports, into theater. So they've discovered their outlet. They're beginning to get positive feedback and feeling better about themselves. Children know, again, I will digress, children know when they are different. When they know they are different, they internalize that anxiety and that shame, and they struggle with that throughout actually their lives. Okay. So to go back, if I have time, to the boy and girl that's growing up, the boys can, with that energy, with that impulsivity, if we learn new skills, these guys can become very successful. There's a lot of famous people that have a history of ADD or ADHD.